Welcome to our webinar today on the tips for writing a paper for IEEE journals. This is actually organized by IEEE Malaysia, ComSoc and VTS Joint Chapter. And before we start, let me just read a little bit about Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee is also a member of ComSoc VTS. And so he received the Bachelor of Engineering Honours degree in Electronics, majoring in Telecommunication, and a PhD degree from Multimedia University in 2012 and 2017, respectively. He was a visiting researcher at National Chiao Tung University under the 2015 NCTU Elite Internship Program in 2015, and at Guangzhou University for Nationalities under the ASEAN Talented Young Scientists or Guangzhou program in 2019. So he is currently serving as an assistant professor with the Chian Faculty of Engineering and Science, University Tunku Abdul Rahman, UTAR. He has served as a member of the IEEE VTS Ad Hoc Committee for AI in wireless communication, and his current research interests include wireless communications for 5G and 6G. So before we start, before I hand over to Dr. Lee, just a bit of information for all the listeners. We are doing the recording, but I have to get the consent from Dr. Lee first before I actually publish this to the public or share it with everyone else. So once we get the clearance, then only we can actually share the recording. And secondly, if you do have any questions, you can type either in the chat box, then we will read the questions later for Dr. Lee, or you can also raise your hand. There is a raise hand button, the one with the palm. Then you can raise your hand, and then I will let you ask the questions. All right. So we will take in order so that everything is in order. So raise your hand first if you want to ask any questions. And thirdly, basically because this is organized by ComSoc VTS, so the journals and Dr. Lee's area is basically into communications and related to communication. So perhaps the journal may be skewed towards the IEEE journals or transactions in communications, etc. But I think it can be applied to all the other IEEE journals as well in general. So hopefully we can gain something from a very experienced publisher. I think Dr. Lee has just recently published quite a few numbers of papers in the on the 6G in IEEE transactions and also IEEE access. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Lee. So the session is yours, Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Prof. Yusuf. Good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to be invited by Prof. Yusuf to conduct this sharing. Okay, so maybe I will start sharing my screen. Okay, Prof. Yusuf, can you see my screen?
Yes, can, but it's not in the slideshow.
Okay, I'll do it in the slideshow.
All right. Yeah, it's in the slideshow now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So my sharing here is actually, the title is Tips for Writing a Paper for IEEE Journals. So I must highlight first, right? These are just tips, but it's not really a guarantee that you can successfully publish a paper in IEEE journals. It's more like something you should avoid, something that you should do so that you have a higher chance to get into IEEE journals. All right. So this is the outline of my presentation. First, I will talk about why we publish with IEEE. So next, I will talk about how we can identify a suitable IEEE journal that you can publish in. All right. And then what should you do to write an article where it can impress, right, to avoid something that the IEEE journals do not prefer, right? To avoid those some silly mistakes, right? And then the paper writing is not just about writing only. Sometimes it also do with the submission, paper submission, and how you revise it. So it's actually from writing until you submit, and then after submission you have a decision, and you should also revise the paper. So it's a process of writing, revising, submitting, and then probably revising again, and until you get your paper get accepted. And then what should you do, right? After receiving a decision, depends on what is the decision. If it's a revise and resubmit, then what should you do when you revise the paper, and how do you resubmit? What should you be aware of, right? And also I will provide other tips, right? Which are based on my experience, so that maybe it will be helpful for you guys to to submit or to write a research article for to be published in IEEE journals. Okay. Next. Okay, so let's go with why publish with IEEE. Okay, so as Prof. Yusuf has mentioned, so my experience is more on the communications. So all the tips or the sharing that I will be talking about is maybe it's more skewed towards the communication area, right? So I would like to highlight that in the area of telecommunications, right, IEEE have 9 journals that make the top 10 list by impact factor. So the impact factor is actually the impact factor is like reputation or the impact of these journals, which are produced by the organization used to be called ISI, now it's called Thomson Reuters, right? So you can actually check out the journal citation report. You can find out the journals, top journals by impact factor. So I take this from the IEEE websites. They also have listed down the journals which are in the area of telecommunications. So you can see the top one, the first top one is actually the IEEE Communication Surveys and Tutorials. So this journal mainly publishes surveys, tutorials, review articles, right? So by far it is the journal that has the highest impact factor in the area of telecommunications. This is followed by other journals like IEEE Wireless Communication Magazine, IEEE Network, IEEE Regular Technology Magazine. So you can see most of the surveys and magazines make the top list, right? And then we have something like transactions journals, which are more on the technical work, like IEEE Internet of Things Journal, JSEC, Journal on Selected Areas in Communication, Transaction on Emerging Topics in Computing, on Wireless Communication, and many more. So so far my achievement, right, I've actually published in 3 of these journals, right? IEEE Communication Surveys and Tutorial, Communication Magazine, and also Transaction on Wireless Communications. Okay, so there are also other top IEEE journals which are quite reputable among the telecommunication community, such as the Transaction on Vehicular Technology, Transaction on Communications, and we also have letters, wireless communication letters, IEEE Systems Journal. These are, I believe it's still in Q1, right? The quartile 1, which means the top 25% of the telecommunications journals, right? So my experience is that I have also published in 4 of these journals: Transaction of Vehicular Technology, Wireless Communication Letters, and also IEEE Systems Journal, right? So my experience will be actually based on the publication, right, on these journals. Okay, so after talking about those prominent journals, right? So what actually are the benefits if you publish in these journals, right? So the first thing comes in mind is the global prestige. You will be recognized as an expert, okay, on the topic of the publication that you have written for the IEEE journals. And IEEE community actually consists of industry, professionals, academia, and the government. So if they see your work, right, usually IEEE publish very high quality work. So if you manage to publish that, right, your reputation will increase, right? And they also know you are an expert on a particular topic. So this in future may attract more collaboration, or perhaps you will get higher number of citation, right? So if you notice, right, the IEEE journal papers at the end of the paper, they are biographies, right? So this also helps to increase, right, your profile, your visibility, so that they know you, right, as an expert on this topic. Okay, so it is really a good venue for increasing your global prestige. Okay, next is the high visibility in the IEEE Explore. As I mentioned, there are many professionals, experts, academicians that frequently browse the IEEE Explore papers. So your work will get noticed faster, all right? And because there are so many subscribers to IEEE Explore, so your paper has a high potential to gain large numbers of citations, right? This will further increase your profile, right? And also possibly attract more collaborations and students, right? Some of you are academicians, so you hope to attract more students to work with you on the topic of interest, right? So this IEEE Explore, IEEE Publications is a very, very good venue. So you can see this is a website. Sometimes the website, right, they will feature some popular authors or authors that have published a very important work. So you might get a chance to get featured here as well, right? So it will further, your work, right, will actually get noticed and becomes the highlight, right? Okay, so these are the benefits if you publish articles in IEEE journals. Okay, now we go into how to identify a suitable IEEE journal for your work, right? So these are the things. Based on my experience, what I would do is I will first check my work, all right? I will analyze the amount of contribution of my work. Okay, whether the contribution is a small contribution or a large contribution. And then do we need a lot of pages to, write into the paper, the work that I have done, okay? And I will also need to analyze the quality of the contribution. Is it a small contribution, but it is a very high quality one, very novel, very new, okay, very innovative, okay? And I also need to check out if the contribution is large, right? Do I need a lot of pages to write into it? Okay, so the last 2 points, right, are actually based on my experience, right? If you have a small amount of contributions, and when you write into a paper, right, the number of pages is small, and also at the same time the contributions are very novel. The work is very novel, very innovative. You can consider journals like letters, correspondence, or short papers, right? They are actually 4 to 6 pages. Like for example, IEEE wireless communication letters and IEEE communication letters. These are short papers. Okay, the number of pages is around 4 to 5 pages. There used to be 3, and then somehow they increased to 4. Then now they increased to 5. But the 5th page, they will charge you. Okay, so there are also IEEE transaction on vehicular technology. They also accept short papers up to 6 pages. Okay, so you can try to analyze whether your work, right, is a very, very novel, small contribution. Maybe you can consider submitting and publish in letters. However, if your work is of large amount of contribution, okay, sometimes your work may not be each contribution is not very significant, but somehow you have a lot of contribution that make this paper collectively novel, right? So that means you increase the you increase the quantity of the contribution so that you make up the novelty, right? So in this kind of situation, you can consider a full-length regular paper journal, pick of all pages, right? So here I didn't mention high quality, okay, but sometimes you have a large number of contribution because you have a lot of contribution. So when you accumulate it all together into one paper, it can be considered novel. And if your contribution is each contribution in the paper is of very high quality, then maybe you you still, of course, it will be better. The chance to get accepted will be higher. All right, but sometimes papers, right, they accept mediocre contributions, right? For example, large amount of contribution, but each contribution is a small significance. But because it's large number, so collectively it is a significant work. So maybe it's just you can get accepted, but maybe just doesn't worth an award or something, right? But you still have a chance to get published in those papers. But anyway, this also is subject to the reviewers, right? Sometimes we have to convince that the reviewers that our work is actually truly novel, right? So this one, you need to when you respond to the reviewers' comments, you really need to convince them and then do some comparison with existing literature work to show that your work is truly novel. Okay, but anyway, this one, this part, right, is just to check the amount and the quality of contribution so that you can select the right journal to submit to. Okay, next, check the IEEE journal that you plan to submit. So you, at least you need to do these two things: check the scope of the journal and search the sample issues of the journal that you plan to publish in. Okay, check the scope whether your work is relevant to the journal. Okay, so this is an example that's I put in this page, right? So they always have an aims and scope, so you can read here whether your work, right, is relevant to this journal, right? Whether it fits under the scope, right? So that is the first thing. Second thing is you need to search the sample issues. Sometimes the scope might not have you might not find the topic exactly in the scope of the journal. So if you cannot find it, then you try to search the sample issues. Okay, so when you check the issues, right? So the issues can be found in IEEE website, like early access papers, current issues, all other issues. You go and search some sample papers and see whether there are any papers that are on similar topics that you are working on, right? So that if there are, that will be good news, means your paper might fit into this journal, right? And when you check the sample issues, right, it is good to also look at the papers, the content of the paper, or content of the sample papers, because sometimes the journal quality, right, they're actually evolving. So maybe 10 years ago, the paper, when you look at the paper, it seems that the contribution is not a large amount, right? But if you look at the recent papers, maybe the contribution that they have in the paper is becoming larger compared to maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? So it means that the quality required by the journal, right, may be even larger. So you have to check, make sure your work have something like comparable contribution, so that you have a higher chance to get published in this journal. So you are not just checking the scope, you also need to check whether the standard or quality required by the journal, right, is demanding or not demanding, and see whether your work can be has a higher chance to get into this journal or not. All right, so always check the recent sample papers, right? That is something good for you to be aware of. And also you might want to check whether what is the recent writing style, because the writing style of the IEEE papers, they are evolving every time, right? So you need to keep track and get up to date by reading the recent papers. Okay. So so next, what should you do to produce a well-written article for submission to IEEE journals? Okay, the first thing is what I would do is I will read the instruction for authors. I need to see what the journal wants, right? But sometimes they will specify a certain requirements, what should be in the paper for their journals, right? So we should read the instruction for authors, and also download the right IEEE journal paper template. Now the IEEE website, they prepare a template. They have a website. If you select a particular journal, they will provide you a template. So you can just use the template and write your article. Okay, so they offer two different software, two templates for two different software. One is the LaTeX. The other one is the Microsoft Word, right? I personally use both, but now frequently I more prefer to use LaTeX, right? Because the organization of the mathematical content and the formatting, right, is easier with LaTeX, right? And it's nicer. We can make the paper, right, more organized with LaTeX. Okay, and the organization of figures is also nicer, in my opinion. But this is up to the preference of different people. Okay, and then provide a suitable title for the paper. So we need to think of a very good title that is impressive, yet it reveals the technical novelty behind the work, right, for the paper. And then based on the information that you collect from the instruction for authors, right, you can start planning the structure of the main body of the paper. So that is from introduction to the conclusion, okay, as well as the abstract. Okay, so these are some of the examples for the structure of the paper. This is more skewed towards the communications journals, and these are just some of the examples. It's not a definite way that you organize your paper, right? So example one, abstract definite is the first one. Then it's followed by introduction. Okay, and then related work, which is the literature review part, to describe the existing advances, right? The current advances on the topic. And then system model, problem formulation, methodology, performance evaluation, conclusion, and references. So this kind of structure, right, is more on the problem solving kind of work, right? You have a problem. You have a problem. You first describe the system model, and then formulate the problem based on the system model, and then provide a solution to solve the problem, right? And then you evaluate the solution, whether it's good or not, and then conclude the result, right? This is one example. Example two, abstract introduction, problem modeling, proposed solution. This is quite similar to the example one, right? Except the related work is not there, because sometimes there are authors that integrate the related work part into the introduction. Okay, that means related work is part of the introduction. So there are also papers like this. So you can merge related work into the introduction. Okay, and sometimes you have acknowledgement. You want to acknowledge someone who has contributed to the work of the paper, but not in writing, right? Appendix, maybe you want to show some supplementary information, right? And we put in the appendix, right? Example 3, we have abstract, we have introduction, we have methodology, result and discussion. This kind of structure, right? Maybe not on problem solving, but more on analysis, right? Or they want to introduce some new algorithm, okay? Some new analysis method, right? Not on problem solving, but more on the analytical work, theory, more on developing a theory or something, right? So there are many examples. It all depends on what topic you are working on and whether it is analytical or whether it is a problem solving kind of work, right? So there are no definite ways to organize, right, the paper or for the structure of the paper, right? But it must be with a logical flow, right? You have an introduction, you introduce first, then you provide a system model, what system model you are working on, and then what problem you are trying to solve and how you solve it, right? So it must be based on a logical flow so that the readers can follow the your paper easily. Okay, title of the paper. So for the title of the paper, right, you should be specific, concise, and descriptive, right? Should mention the key mechanism, issue, aspects, technique, technology being studied in the paper. Okay, this is recommended, right? I'm not saying that you must include all of them, right? Sometimes they maybe it's just aspect. If it's an analytical work, it's just maybe aspect, right? Or a key technique to analyze, right? Just so this just the things which are important in the paper you should mention out in the title. Okay, so one example is here. Let's say a paper is trying to develop a power allocation scheme based on some technique like machine learning for some network, okay, multi-cell network to maximize the network energy efficiency. Okay, so your title should consist of the key mechanism, which is the power allocation. Okay, the technique behind the mechanism, okay, machine learning, the system model that you are, the technology, right, the multi-cell network, and the aspects or the issue that you want to solve, right, energy efficiency. So you can have a title like machine learning based power allocation for energy efficient multi-cell networks. Okay, so the both statements, right, the phrases that are bold, right, they are the key things in the paper, so they should be in the title. Okay, so that when I read the paper, right, I know, oh, this technique is based on this key mechanism is based on some new technique, and also from the title, I know what is your objective. It is to make the network energy efficient, right? So from the title, you can know what your paper is about, right? So that is the what you should have in your in the title of the paper. Okay, next, abstract. So some journals, right? Some IEEE journals, they have specific requirements on the number of words in the abstract. So you should check the information for authors on the journal that you select. All right, see how many words they require. Okay, sometimes it's 150, sometimes 200, sometimes it's 250. Okay, so you have to check the information for authors. Okay, the abstract, right? I would suggest a flow here. Your abstract should consist the background on the topic of interest or the topic of your work. And then the next thing is to point out what is the problem that you are trying to investigate in the work, right? And then you should mention the objective of your work, okay? And then describe the methodology, okay, to how you achieve the objective, okay, or the technique that you propose to achieve the objective or to solve the problem. And then you should also highlight the important results or the significant results that you have achieved from this work. Okay, and the abstract, right, is recommended to be in this flow, right? Background, then problem, objective, methodology, and then highlight your results. Okay, so an example is in the next slide. Okay, this is an abstract from I get from one journal, IEEE Transaction of Wireless Communication. So you can see that the first sentence, right, actually trying to briefly introduce a certain area, right, multi-tenant cellular network slicing. So this is the thing that they briefly introduce, okay? And then they mention the problem, okay? They say the problem is this area is not well explored under this network architecture, okay? Heterogeneous cloud radio access network. Okay, next they talk about the objective, right? So this paper proposes a network slicing scheme for multi-tenant HC-RANs, and they also highlight the principles or the ideas that they have integrated into the proposed scheme, right? It is good to highlight, the key ideas or the principles or theory that you have integrated into it, which makes the work novel, right? And then here they talk about the methodology, how they achieve the objective or how they develop the proposal, develop the proposed scheme. So they say the framework of the scheme consists of an upper level, which does the management of emission control, user association, and so on. And then another level, lower level, to perform other tasks, radio resource allocation, and so on, right? So this is the methodology part. And then finally, the results, right, show that the scheme can achieve higher network throughput, fairness, and QoS performance. So the significant results here are all this, right? Maybe in the result and discussion section, they have more results, but here they highlight the important ones, right? The significant results they highlight in the abstract. Okay, so this is the one example that meets the flow that I mentioned earlier, right, in the previous slide here. Okay, background, problem, objective, the core methodology, and the important results. Okay. All right, so this is the abstract. Here we move on to the introduction of the paper. Okay, the recommended way, the way that I recommend is you first start with a more detailed background on the topic that you are studying, right? You, for example, if you are working on a certain area for 5G communications, so you should introduce the 5G first, and narrow down to the area, the specific area that you are studying. Okay, so once you have a detailed background, you can narrow down the description, okay, to the specific topic you are studying, right? We always try to introduce the area first, the field, and then narrow down to the topic that you are studying. And your introduction, right, should consist of the statements that stating the motivation of the study and the problem that the paper is trying to address. Many papers, when they submit to IEEE journals, because I also have I am a regular reviewer for many journals, which include the Transaction of Wireless Communication, Transaction on Regular Technology Communication, System Journal. Many IEEE journals I have been the regular reviewer. So I found that they always missing this part, the motivation of the study and the problem that they are trying to address. They just straight away talk about what they want to do, but they didn't give the reason why they want to achieve this objective. Okay, so this part is actually the reason why you want to do this study. So you should point out the motivation, and the problem that you are trying to address. And you should do this with respect to the existing related work. That means you should have do a literature review. You have reviewed many papers, then only come up with this problem, right? Because if some problem have been solved by other papers, then what is the motivation of doing this study again? It's just a replication of other people's work, right? So that the novelty will be less in this case. So your work, you have to point out the problem respect to the existing work, and then find out the research gaps in the literature review in the existing work, where this is the research gap that you want to solve in your work in this paper. Right, so you should point out this motivation and the problem respect to the existing work. Okay, you cannot simply just point out the problem without a review of existing work, because it just becomes a claim without a proof, right? So existing literature, the literature review is actually the proof that your problem that you're trying to study is valid, is important. Okay. So after you point out the motivation and the problem, then you can mention the aim or objective of the paper. Okay, it's easy. The objective is to solve the problem, but of course you should also mention the key idea. Perhaps if you want to solve a resource allocation problem, what kind of technique you aim to use to solve this problem? Maybe machine learning, deep learning, or reinforcement learning. So you can include those key techniques in the objective. Okay, with relation to the problem statement, that means you should have an objective that is trying to solve the problem, right? That you point out in for your paper, right? You can't be possibly talking about a problem and then and objective to achieve different things, right? That means it will confuse the reader, right? And then you can highlight your contribution of the paper item by item, right? If possible, then you can create a new system model. So that would be one contribution. And then you develop a new problem. Okay, there's a problem that people have never investigated it before, and you have formulated it mathematically, maybe. So that is also one contribution. And then you propose a solution to the new problem that you're trying to solve, right? That is another contribution, right? So you can explicitly, right, highlight them in the paper, so that the reviewers or readers, they know also this paper have done these things which are very novel. Okay, and also showcase to the reviewers that the work that you have done, right, consists of a lot of contributions. Okay. Okay, next, related work of the paper. So when you do your literature review and you want to write them in your paper, right? So you should describe them, what each paper is, what each related work is trying to do, and then what problem they is trying to solve, and then what result it has achieved. Okay, sometimes you can make this write them in 3 or 4 sentences. Sometimes you can write in 1 or 2 sentences, right? So these 3 questions here, right, are not really a must, but if you have them, it will be good. Okay, sometimes the description of the literature review can be very simple. It try to achieve something with this. So 1 sentence, they can answer all these 3 questions. Okay, so you don't necessarily need to write a lot of sentences to explain this, right? You should summarize them, but your summary should consist of this, what is it trying to do, what problem it's trying to solve, and what result it has achieved, right? Anyway, these are just examples, right? For related work that is on analysis, right? So you just mention what is it trying to do, right? And then what impact does it, or what findings does it have, okay? Next, summarize the research gaps with respect to all the related work that you have reviewed in the paper. So, you don't just write the literature review, just describe other people's work, but you don't have a conclusion from the literature review. Okay, you should at the end of maybe the last paragraph of your related work section, right? You can summarize the research gap, saying that all of the work they missed one aspect or they lack of something, and that's something is actually what you want to investigate or trying to solve. Okay, so this will further strengthen your problem statement in the paper, which you might have mentioned it in the introduction part. Okay, so this part is the part where it serves as the proof of your claim that the problem that you are trying to study is important and it is timely. Okay. Okay, now comes to the main body of the paper. So here I'm not going to talk about how you section by section, like maybe system model, problem formulation, and the solution, right? Because it depends on what paper it is. If it's an analytical work to analyze something, right, then it's not applicable. So here I will just emphasize and highlight those things that you should you can consider in the main body of the paper. First thing is provide figures, all right, if possible. Figures can speak 1,000 words. So if you provide a figure, actually will help the reader to understand what are you trying to study, what are you trying to investigate. Okay, so with a figure, it can actually help the reader to understand quickly, because if you have a paper that with a very lengthy text, right, actually it's quite tiring to read. But if you provide a figure, it can make the reader understand quicker, right, and then can follow your text more easily. Okay, because just solely reading the text maybe is difficult for the reader to understand, right, the entire work. So figure will be very helpful. And then you should make sure that the basic information is provided in the early stage. Okay. Don't quickly introduce some advanced equations, formulas, right? You should provide the basic information, some terms that are very fundamental, okay, that are required to understand more advanced equations, formulas, or theory. So you should make sure basic information are there first, okay? And then make sure that the description, the text are clear and concise, okay? You should mention the things clearly and concise, right? So concise here would mean the sentences or the statements are short, not too lengthy, and they are precise and specific to the things the thing that they want to convey. Okay, so try to minimize redundant and repetitive description. So I'm using the word minimize. It doesn't mean that you should not repeat, right? Sometimes at some parts you want to highlight the idea again, you can repeat. Just try to minimize the redundant and repetitive description, right? Not saying you must not repeat, okay? But you can minimize them. And then make sure they are clear and concise, right? And then if you are writing on many mathematical equations, formulas, right? I recommend to italicize all the mathematical variables and parameters. Usually all the mathematical terms, right, they are italics, okay? And non-mathematical terms, variables or parameters, they are non-italics, normal, okay? So that you actually can help the reader to understand easier, because some authors, they use italicized terms which are not mathematical variables. So some readers may confuse whether this is a mathematical variable or not mathematical variable. So you should keep this habit where if you are if you have a term which is mathematical, you italicize them. Okay, if they are not, then you make them into a regular form, non-italicized. Okay, and of course there are exceptions like matrix notation. Matrix notation are not italicized, but they are bold. Okay, so it's also used in mathematics kind of papers, right? So there are some exceptions, right? Okay, so clearly define the mathematical notation used, okay, and try to minimize the number of alphabets used in the notation to denote a single variable parameter. Okay, so some papers they use when they use a notation to denote a certain variable, like for example, here minimum data rate, right? They write in the mathematical equation as rate mean, right? So this is a bit lengthy and sometimes it might confuse people where each letter in the term notation, right, maybe is a variable. If they didn't introduce it in the paper earlier, right, we can get confused. So a recommended way is to just use one letter. Like for example, the good notation part, minimum data rate, I just use R. Okay, and then non-mathematical variable MIN, mean, right, is to denote that it is a minimum data rate. Okay, so MIN at the subscript there is not mathematical variable, so I didn't italize them. Okay. Another example, spectral efficiency. Some people use a very long one to represent it. Spec EFF, right? Is too long. Maybe each letter is a variable, right? So it's a poor notation here. Maybe just use the a single letter, right? Or maybe just as most 2 SE, right? And recommend not to italicize non-mathematical terms in any notation. Okay, for example, the R min denotes minimum data rate. So the min here is to indicate that it is some minimum quantity. So actually it is not a mathematical variable. So I didn't italize them. Okay, so this will not create the confusion whether MIN here is a variable or not, right? Okay, if you are doing something on analytical work or developing some new theorem, lemma or proposition, right? So you can express them, right, in a structure of the theorem, lemma, and proposition. If you notice in the IEEE papers, right, they sometimes will write out theorem 1 and then they make the statement there. They write the statement there and then provide a proof. Okay, so if you have findings like this, right, you have developed a new equation and you have a proof that the equation is valid, okay, for a certain situation, you can write them in the form of theorem, right? Theorem 1, write the statement, and then you have a proof, then write the proof, right? And then with this, that means you can organize these mathematical findings in this structure, right? It can be in theorem, lemma, or proposition, right? Because this could be some important findings, right? So if you do it that way, right, this will highlight that it's something important, okay? And then the proofs, right, you can provide in the main body or actually put it in the appendix, okay? If the proof is not so necessary in the main body, then you can put it in the appendix. But if the proof is important to be shown in the main body, maybe it will lead to some other, it's crucial for some understanding for some other theorem or some other part description in the main body, then you can put it in the main body. Okay. And if algorithms are involved, right, try to provide the flow charts or pseudocodes, all right, to show the step-by-step procedure of the algorithm. And in the text, you should describe each step in the algorithm as much as possible, okay? So that you are not just providing the pseudocode, expecting the reader to understand by themselves. You should also guide them, the algorithms, what is it trying to do, right? In each step, okay? So you should provide the description as well. Okay, some people they just write in the text form, in the table form, like step 1, step 2, step 3. That is also fine. Okay, as long as you are providing some step-by-step procedure, a very clear procedure, okay, that would be a very good way to explain the algorithm. if there are too many notations are involved in your paper, right? Perhaps you should provide a table of notation to help the reader to recall the notation that you have introduced earlier. You don't just provide the table of notation and then you don't introduce them in the text, right? Actually, you should introduce this notation in the text as well as providing the table of notation, okay? Because sometimes the table of notation is not so clear. And in the text, if you straight away just use it and without introducing it, it's hard to understand, right? The text in the paper. Okay, so that is the main body part. So if you have your system model, problem formulation, proposed solution, or other methodologic work that you want to describe, so make sure you have avoid those this like this mathematical notation issues, right? Italicized or not italicized. The basic information should be there in the early stage, right? Provide figures as much as possible if needed, right? Okay, and if algorithms, make sure you have step-by-step procedure and so on. Okay, then result and discussion. So when you discuss your result in the paper, right, you should provide the settings of the simulation. Okay, the system model, how many base station or how many access point you are considering, what is its transmission power, and then how many mobile users or wireless user in the system model that you are considering, the algorithm setting, right, everything, right, for the your experiment. And then you should discuss the results. Okay, you need to describe the results, whether it's increasing, reducing, or whether it's better or worse. Okay, and then you need to give reason. Okay, you need to give reason why they increase, why they stagnant, why they decrease. Okay, so you need to give reason, so that, and then when you give reason, right, you need to relate it with your proposed technique or proposed scheme. Okay, for example, your power allocation scheme is the proposed one has outperformed the existing scheme because the proposed scheme uses the machine learning to train to learn the channel environment efficiently or effectively, right? So you try to link to the novelty or the novel idea that you come up with in your paper to explain why your proposed technique is better. Okay, so that will be helpful. So that will prove that your key idea is working, right? Is truly important, truly novel. Okay, and better to provide some comparison. Okay, it can be a theoretical result versus experimental result or simulated result, or proposed scheme versus the baseline or state-of-the-art scheme, right? Because if whether to know whether your scheme is better or not, right? We should have some sort of baseline or some comparison to know how much improvement or whether the scheme is good or not, right? We need something to be compared. And then conclusion, right? You should summarize the findings of the paper, conclude the important points, right? And discuss the limitation of the paper, where maybe this limitation will lead to some other future work. So you can also state them, what future work that you can further expand from your current work, okay? It is good to point out some future work so that this area, right, the topic that you're working is still worth investigating. There's still much room for further investigation. So to inspire other people, right? So that probably this will also attract other people to who have interest to work in this area and then work with you on these future directions. Okay. Okay, next, acknowledgement. So you can acknowledge the assistance of those who are not authors or co-authors in the research work. You can also acknowledge the review efforts by the editor and reviewers. Appendix, right? You can use this to provide the mathematical proofs, as I mentioned earlier, on the main body of the paper. Okay, and maybe other things that is relevant but not necessarily required in the main body. Okay, citation and references. So for IEEE papers, we use the IEEE referencing style. So if you use LaTeX, right, if you use the BibTeX file, right, they can actually help you to organize. You just need to input the information into the BibTeX file, right? And the references should be listed in the order the references are cited in the text, meaning if you have one reference, you introduce it first, then it will be reference 1. Okay, and then if you have another reference, follow the reference 1 cited in the text, that would be reference 2. Okay, so it should be in this order. Okay, now come to the part where we talk about what to do during the submission. Okay, first you follow the instruction of the journal, right? Ensure that the paper title, author's name, and abstract, right, are the same as what you provide in the system, into the submission system. Key in whatever necessary in the submission system, such as the funding information, and then you confirm that this paper is solely submitted to this journal and so on, and then choose suitable keywords for the paper. Okay, cover letter. I believe almost every journal, right, has an option for you to submit a cover letter. Okay, I actually encourage you to submit a cover letter. The cover letter can highlight the importance of the issues that you're studying and the contribution of the paper. And then you use it to declare and justifying that the paper, if your paper is actually an extension from a conference paper, then you can highlight this in the cover letter, saying that what are the extension that you have done from the conference paper in the cover letter. Okay, so if your work is based on a conference paper, right, you can declare it and write out the additional contribution from the conference paper in the cover letter. And then you can again write out that you confirm this paper is solely submitted to the journal and all authors agree to its submission. Okay, so this is a sample cover letter. Okay, you can address to the editor-in-chief, right? And then you say that we would like to submit an article entitled the name of the paper, and then the author's name, right? And then for consideration of publication in the IEEE journal, okay, the journal that you select to submit. And then in this article, you can highlight the contribution, the significance of the study. And you say you believe that it fits the scope of the journal and give reasons why. Okay, if your work is based on a conference paper, it's an extension from the conference paper, then you should detail it here, highlight the additional contribution over the conference version. Okay, many journals, they ask for at least 30%. Okay, so you must justify that your additional contribution is 30% more compared to the conference version. Okay, and then you can say hereby confirm that the paper is solely submitted to the journal. Okay, and you can say sincerely your name and you are the corresponding author and so on, right? This is just a sample, right? So there is no definite way of writing the cover letter, but it's good to have this. Okay. Next, what should you do after receiving a decision? So there are many possible decisions, depends on the journal. Some they have accept, minor revision, major revision, reject and resubmit, reject with no resubmission allows. Okay, so actually I have experienced all these decision before. Okay, so I think everyone has experienced this, right? So if the paper is accepted, then congratulations, you can just proceed, right? Your paper will appear in the IEEE journal. If the paper requires major revision, minor revision, reject and resubmit, okay, then you revise the paper based on the comments given by the reviewer and resubmit the revised paper to the same journal together with a response letter. So the response letter actually is a document to rebut or to address the comments of the reviewer. So if the paper is rejected, right? So maybe don't give up, right? Just revise the paper based on the comments as much as possible and resubmit to another journal, okay? So the response letter, right, should address each comment of the reviewers. So my advice is not ignoring the comments, okay? You should address each comment, okay? Then the response given in the response letter should also be reflected in the revised paper. That means when you rebut or when you address a certain comment of the reviewer, you should also make the changes in the paper, right? Not leaving it just just reply to the response letter. You should also make the revision in the paper. Okay, and then your response letter is recommended to provide clear indication which part that you have revised in the paper. Okay, so that the reviewer can quickly go to the revised part and see whether he or she is satisfied. Okay, write the response letter in a polite manner. Okay, you can politely acknowledge the comments of the reviewers and make changes whenever necessary. Okay, if you are not, if you do not agree with the reviewer's comment, you want to defend. Okay, you also should politely defend. Okay, okay, you should highlight that maybe we have missed some concept that or maybe you have missed some certain concept. We would like to highlight this concept again, explain in the response letter politely. Okay. So this is just an example. For example, if you have a reviewer comment saying that something is not done, like complexity of a proposed scheme is not analyzed, then you should say, okay, we have provided the analysis in the revised manuscript in the first paragraph on which section and which page, right? And then further mention that you have highlight the findings, right? We have found that the proposed scheme has a complexity of O(n), where n is the number of iterations. So you also highlight it in the response letter, okay? Okay, last part, other tips, right? My advice is not to use contraction like don't, won't, and can't, okay? Professional writing does not encourage you to use contractions here. Okay, and then proofread your manuscript carefully and thoroughly. Some reviewers, they are very particular on the English language, right? So if they see that your paper is not written well and they can not understand the language, the sentences, right? They can reject you based on this reason, okay? And you can write it in active or passive form. Both are acceptable, right? Certain journals, they might have requirements that do not allow the use of active forms. So you must always read the instruction for authors, right? You check the information for authors, whether they allow this or not. If they didn't mention, that means they should allow both forms, active or passive forms. So there are two ways, right? For example, active form, right? We say in this study, we develop a technique for cellular network. Okay, passive form is a resource allocation scheme is developed. Okay, so if the journal accept both of this, right, you can choose either of this way to write in the IEEE journal papers. And lastly, right, you should seek advices from the people who have frequently published in IEEE journals, right? They will give you the most up-to-date advice suggestion, right, to what you should do when you submit to IEEE journal, okay? So these are the references which I use as the material of this presentation. So this is all for my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lee. That was
Yeah, thanks.
very fruitful. I think quite a number of tips there. We
Yeah.
have a few questions from the audience, from the listeners. Let's look at the first question by Danladi Agadi. He's asking, he or she is asking, what are things to include in the review paper to make the paper look novel? since it's a review paper, right?
Okay.
So how to make that paper look different or novel?
Okay. For review papers, right? Usually what we need to do is we need to have we should have done a very comprehensive literature review. And when you do the literature review, we must know what they have done, what aspect they have addressed. So you must analyze what aspect they have considered. Okay, you need to do some either qualitative analysis or quantitative analysis. You need to do comparison between each related work, analyze them whether they have considered studying this aspect or not. All right. So you should have some sort of like a comparison table to see what studies they have studied, they have investigated, and that or maybe what objective or what aspect, right? What issues they are concentrating or they are focusing. So you have to have a table that can uh, that can indicate, right, each paper that what they have studied, what aspect they have done, they have considered, what solution that they have provided. Okay, and then from the table, right, you should highlight what aspect they are lacking in the study, or aspect that very few papers are studying. So from there you can highlight, okay, this is the thing that is not well studied. Okay, and then you can make reference to the papers that study it. They have considered this aspect, but maybe not enough, right? So you point out what is the insufficient part that the insufficient part that they, in their study, right? The research gaps. Then this is the one of the novel things that you should highlight in a review paper. We don't just blindly review, but we also analyze them, find out what are the things that are not studied sufficiently. Okay, and then from those issues, right, you can derive future directions. Okay, maybe energy efficiency is not well studied in many papers. Okay, so you can point out a future direction, what technology can help further improve the energy efficiency. Okay, so you need to analyze the work either qualitatively or quantitatively, meaning either by theoretical analysis or by simulation. Okay, and then from there you draw the future directions, what you can further do to address these research gaps. Okay, so these are the novel things that should be included in the review paper, right? It's not just read the literature review and just restate it, because uh, if you just rewrite, just summarize, right? I just need to go back to the papers and read it. I don't need to really read your paper if your paper doesn't offer any new things, right? So the new things will be the analysis, the comparison, and the future directions. Yeah, I think that is my reply. Yeah.
Okay, hope that answered the question by Damradi. There's another question, there's a second question from Vishnu Karna. Do we need to consider acceptance rate and time to take first decision published before submitting to a journal? If yes, how to find them?
Based on my experience, I don't really consider the acceptance rate. Okay, but time to take time to get your first decision, that I will consider. All right, it depends on because sometimes some journals, right, usually IEEE journals are fast, so other journals like non-IEEE journals maybe take a bit longer time to get your first decision. So if your paper needs to be quickly put into publication, right? Maybe due to grant requirement, or maybe there's some deadline, right? Then you can take this consideration for submitting a paper to a journal. Okay, but if let's say that journal is a very high quality one, but the time to publish is long, and you don't have any requirements that you must submit and publish it sooner, then probably you can aim for this. If your paper is really of high quality, high quality, very novel contribution, I think you should try to submit this kind of journal. Okay, if you there's no restriction on the timeline and so on. Okay, and acceptance rate, really I never considered this, because if you manage to publish in a very low acceptance rate journal, it means that your work is really of top-notch quality, isn't it? So that's, I think, to me, it's not very a big factor for me to consider. Yeah, I think that, yeah, that's my response.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Dr. Lee. There's a question from Dick Sang Ho. Sir, can you provide some advices for contingency studies paper? I'm not so sure what it means by
Contingency.
backup plans.
Yeah, I never heard of contingency study before.
Is it a review paper? Not so sure what it means. Maybe Dick Sang Ho, you may want to clarify what you mean.
Yeah.
There's a question from Lian Zerlim. For journal publication, what fee will incur? Roughly how much is the publication fee?
This one for IEEE journals, IEEE transaction of wireless communication, I think if you exceed 8 pages, then one page will charge more than $200, if I remember correctly. They allow up to 7 pages, so that total is 15, if I remember correctly. So they charge by page. Some journals, they maybe cheaper, like IEEE System Journal. I think one page is $150, and the first 8 pages are free. The subsequent 4 pages, each page is 150. So we need to check each journal overlap page charges. Each journal is different. And then for open access journals, they charge one lump sum because it's open access. So maybe 1,900 something $, or maybe 2,000. Also depends on the journals. So recently the fee has increased. So it's quite currently is considered expensive for some journals. Yeah. So you need some grant support, right? Or maybe you can collaborate with other authors that they have this financial support for this IEEE journals. If for some countries, maybe they are entitled for some waiver. I think you can also try to apply that. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's
yeah, I hope that answers the question. Maybe Di Sang Ho, do you want to clarify your question? Are you still around? Okay, anyone else has any questions for Dr. Lee? Okay, while waiting for questions, if you do have any questions, I'll just make some announcement.
I think there's one more question.
There's one more question. What happened if they caught some plagiarism in our writing? Okay, I think this is interesting.
Yeah. I'm not so sure whether they what software they use to check the plagiarism, but if they really catch you on plagiarism, I believe they will warn you first, give a warning, and probably they will give you a chance to revise and resubmit. So the important thing is the cover letter. You must declare whether your work is based on some other people's work. All right. So you declare, if let's say, because sometimes we have self-plagiarism issue, if you do not declare, right, in the cover letter that your paper is actually extended based on a conference paper, then it might trigger this plagiarism issue. So if you have declared that in the cover letter saying that your paper is based on the conference paper, but at least you have 30% additional contribution over the conference version, right? Then I think it should be fine. So far, I have declared a few times, and there's no issue with this. Okay, but if let's say they catch you, right, maybe it depends on the percentage also, right? If the percentage is not much, maybe they will give you a chance to revise and resubmit. But this is, I'm not too sure about IEEE journals, but there are other journals that they will give you a chance to resubmit, revise and resubmit. And they will ask us to make sure your percentage is below certain target in order to resubmit. Okay, and then they will give us a warning that saying that if you submit a plagiarized work a second time, then they will get banned or something for a amount of period. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I may add on that one, Dr. Lee,
Yeah.
you're right. If you're found guilty, let's say for example you publish in more than one journal, so let's say you submit to IEEE and then it was found that you actually have submitted the same work, or that same work has been published elsewhere, or you copy from someone else, you can get banned. There is what we call a blacklisted, there is a blacklisted authors list
Yes.
under IEEE, and you can get banned for like 3 years. And the thing is, if you are supervisors or if you are students, anyone's or any names on the list will be banned. That means regardless whether you are just a passive author that is writing or figure writing on the paper, or if you're actually the one who's doing the work or the plagiarized work. So you have to be very careful on where your names appear on a paper. So even if your student papers, you have to be aware that the work is actually correct. Or if you're a student, you make sure the papers that is published by your supervisors that put in your name, or your colleagues who actually put in your name, you also have to be careful, because there have been cases where authors have been banned. So IEEE will produce this blacklisted authors to conference organizers, journal editors, and so on. Right. I think we got a few more questions. So there are more questions coming in, Dr. Lee.
Okay.
We got one from for Muhammad Nema. We have to look at the recordings whether we can share or not. Later on, I'll discuss with Dr. Lee. And then Muhammad Azri, how should one choose a journal for post-conference extended paper? Do all journal accept the extended paper post-conference?
Okay. So you should check the information for authors of the journal, whether they allow this or not. Okay. If they didn't mention anything in the information for authors, I think you should you still want to try. I think maybe you can try, but you should provide a cover letter. So your cover letter should state that your work is actually an extended paper from a conference version. All right. So you should declare, right, if there are any thing that you want to ask the question to the editor-in-chief, you should write it in the cover letter. So the cover letter is actually serving as a correspondence with the editor-in-chief. So you can state in the cover letter saying that this work is a conference extension paper. Then you ask for permission, right? Whether this paper can be submitted or can it be considered under this journal. IEEE journals usually they will stay in the conference in the information for authors. So far, IEEE Systems Journal, Transaction and Wireless Communication, they all accept extended paper. So they have, I remember there's an instruction for authors where that they say that they accept this kind of paper with certain requirements. So you just need to read the information for authors to find out. Some journals, they don't accept like letters. They don't accept conference extension paper. In that case, sorry to say, you have to find another journal. Yeah. Okay, so that's all for my reply.
Okay, all right. I think that's quite detailed. There was from Ismail Husna. If we already published the paper in other publication Q4 journal, and we want to publish in IEEE Q1, Q2 journal, is it possible? More fundamental analysis, better result improvement, maybe because previously you only mentioned about publish to conference paper and want to submit to journal, need at least 30% improvement.
Okay, so if your paper has been previously published in a journal, right, and if you want to publish it again in another journal, so that is what we call the plagiarism here. Okay, even if you add a few things, maybe it's still not enough, right? You probably need to think that anything that is published in IEEE journals must be totally or almost unique, totally new kind of work. Then they will consider. So maybe you would like to highlight that your work, right, the new work that you want to publish in Q1 or Q2 is somehow it's the incremental work from Q4, okay, your Q4 journal. But if the contributions is not enough, right, then they probably will reject it because they will say this is just derivative work with very less novelty. Okay, and then they might also question this could be a plagiarism, right? So usually they don't publish what I would say an extended journal paper. Is considered probably a possible plagiarism here. Okay, but extending from conference, yes, because some journals they have the instruction for this particularly, right? So I think if you consider to publish something in a journal, right, it must be something that contributes very significantly. Okay, very significant work, a large amount of contributions. All right. It's just a small improvement. I don't think they will accept this paper. Yeah, that's all from my reply.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Abdul Ahmad. Could you please give some piece of advice for the SLR paper?
SLR. May I know what is the?
SLR is more like systematic literature review.
Systematic literature review.
I think it's almost like a review paper.
Review paper, right?
Uh,
If so, I think it's same as the survey paper or yeah, survey papers. When you review, you should do a comparison analysis on the related work, right? What aspects they have studied, and then try to find out how well they address the aspects. Okay, and then from there you can draw out the findings. What aspects has very less been studied, then give reasons why this study needs to be the focus on this aspect need to be increased, right? So you then derive the future direction, how you can further proceed to study this aspect, right? So it's all go back to the same thing, the same answer to the question before. You should provide a qualitative or quantitative comparison between different existing work, and then from there you highlight the parts or the aspects that very less not well studied, right? Not well investigated. From there, and then point out the future direction of future technology that can help further improve these aspects. Yeah, so these are my response. Yeah.
All right. So that's on SLR. Question from Lee Chung Meng. Since the course is free, if the pages are 3 or less, can I put a link in the paper? So I believe this is on the letters, correct, which is less than 3 pages. Can I put the link on the paper, and in my website, I will mention in detail, while in the paper, I will mention in concise manner the saving number of pages in my paper. Is that possible?
So this means that because your paper, maybe you need to, actually your paper requires maybe 4 pages. You try to compress it into 3 and then provide the additional page in another website so that the reviewer or reader can just go there for the additional information. I remember seeing some papers are doing that, but only the link is only referring to some appendix, okay, some supplementary information. The important information must still be in the 3 pages, right? The part that you are free. I have myself have never do it this way, so I'm not sure whether this is a very good idea. The additional number of pages that you want to save, you don't want to write in the other pages, right? If the reviewer is not satisfied with the way you are doing, right, they can reject you also. So important things, right? Important things, crucial explanation must be in the paper. That is the only thing I can suggest.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So I think it's depending on how you want to make it life easier for the reviewer
Yeah.
itself, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. There's another question. I think you already answered, Azuri. Did Sang-ho, what should I do if my novelty is more on my case study? I'm not so sure how.
Maybe the work is a case study work.
Mm-hmm.
I have never done a case study paper before. Maybe your case study is to it's an experimental work, like maybe perhaps you have a new concept that you want to test, and then you do a case study whether this concept is applicable, right? Maybe that is possible. Unfortunately, I don't have much experience in case study paper, so I'm afraid I couldn't advise more on this part. But I think it's possible because some journals, they do accept case study work, right? They will mention it in the aims and the scope of the journal that they accept it. So you can actually try, right? As long as this is the new case study, people have never done this before. Yeah.
Okay, I think there's another question by Lee Chuming. How to check for plagiarism myself using 38in or any other method?
Yes, myself, I'm using the Turnitin software. They check the similarity index. So some journals, they allow up to 20%, right? But it is advised to reduce much further below 20%. Okay. I think probably there are some softwares, but I'm not so sure about that. Like Identicate. I think those any similarity check software, uh, uh, they need subscription. So if you are attached to an institution, I believe your institution should have access or subscribe at least one plagiarism checking tools. So I think any plagiarism checking tool, I think you can use it. Yeah.
Okay. I think Authenticate is a part of the EDAS
Okay.
where it's in the conference. And normally we use Turnitin as well. I think it's
Yeah.
normal among most universities. Okay, any more questions for Dr. Lee? Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for answering
Sure, sure.
the questions here. Any more questions from the audience? Okay, so if there is no more question, we have some announcement to make. If you are already a student member, IEEE student member, we have what is called the IEEE Consort School Series in Kuala Lumpur, which will be held in Multimedia University from 20th to 23rd June. We would like to welcome any IEEE student member to actually join. If you have not joined as a student consort member, you can join with as little as $1. And the good news is that IEEE Consort will reimburse that Consort student membership. It's free for the Consort student member. Accommodation will be provided to those from outside of Klang Valley. We will also have meals, etc. Everything will be provided, so you can get it there. There is a question on whether we can get the video recording or not. Dr. Lee, is that possible?
Yeah, okay, no problem for me.
No problem, yeah. So I
Yeah,
think
okay.
later on we will share the video recording. Slides I have to ask from Dr. Lee because I don't have the slides. So if you wish to share the slide with the participants, then I can, you just email it to me and I will share to the participants attending today. I think there is one more question, Dr. Lee, from Lok Jing Lao. What is the appropriate way to cite a GitHub repository?
Okay. I have never cite any GitHub repository, but in IEEE referencing format, I think actually there are two ways. Some people they put this link to the GitHub as a footnote in the footnote of a paper. The second way is they cite as a link, anonymous link in the reference, right? You can actually if we use latex, right, there's a way for us to put it under anonymous and then provide the link and then provide the access date and so on, right? It's the site as an anonymous source. Yeah.
Okay, right. I think some of these papers they publish in GitHub and then later on they will also be published in like the proper journals, correct?
Mhm.
Because I've seen some papers that which I actually got from GitHub and then later on it was published in IEEE journals as well. So
Yeah.
there are cases, and then once it's published in IEEE journal, then it will be easier to actually cite that work.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, any more questions from the audience? Okay, so if there is no more question, thank you very much once again, Dr. Lee. It is
Thank you. Thank you.
great to have I think it was a very helpful tips, especially for students or to those new researchers who are planning to publish in IEEE journals. And as you mentioned, most of the IEEE journals are the top tier journals that are mostly in Q1. Especially in communication, we know the top 9 is all IEEE journals. So it's a very good tips that you have shared with us. Okay, to thank you everyone who has attended this session. I will send a link to the video session, and hopefully once I got the slides from Dr. Lee, we can also share with them. With that, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining and hope to see you in future events under IEEE Consort. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.